On the road, in the gym, at a coffee house. No matter where you listen, this is Prevention Perk. I'm Steve Miller with Mid-America PTTC. It's time to perk up our prevention efforts. My guest today is Sierra Thomas. She is new to the prevention world, becoming a community prevention specialist in June 2023. She previously worked as a certified elementary school counselor and continues to love helping others grow in their mental health and wellness journeys. I met Sierra at a professional development workshop, and she shared with me that one of her 28 in 28 goals is to be a podcast guest. So I invited her to the Prevention Perk, and we can chat about her leap into the prevention workforce. She currently resides in Kansas City, Missouri, but hails from small town South Dakota. During this conversation, I hope to learn more about why the leap into prevention, what she hopes to gain from this career path, and most importantly, about her dog, Harper. Hello, Sierra, and welcome to the Prevention Perk.
Hello, I'm excited to be here.
This is fun. I'm glad that you brought this up. Actually, we'll tell a little story on you. Your supervisor kind of threw you under the bus at the development seminar. She said that you wanted to be on a podcast, and we started chatting about it. So just for some clarification, every year, every birth year, you have a corresponding number of goals that you have. So you have 28 goals in now your 28th year, and one of them is to be a podcast guest. My encouragement was in your 29th year, you need to start a podcast. So maybe we can get into that as we go along here. But I think what's interesting with you is you've been doing this now 3 months. Why did you decide to make that leap and jump into the prevention field?
Yeah, so coming from counseling, so working in the education setting, I saw a lot of things that I think made me feel kind of discouraged. I think seeing kids come to school with so many problems that I didn't feel like I could help them with, problems with their home life, with family members or parents or older siblings, like, with substance use and mental health issues and housing concerns and all of these things that just felt so overwhelming for me to handle as a counselor who has these kids 8 hours a day and doesn't see their family at all. So I started in kind of that mindset of like, this is too overwhelming. I feel like I'm doing the same thing over and over again, and I'm not getting any results. And that's like, isn't that what they say is like the definition of insanity? Like doing the same thing over and over again and not getting any results. So I was going a little bit insane, and I was looking for something new, and I came across a Twitter post, I guess an X post. Is it called X now? An X post about a job opening at Tri-County Mental Health Services and in their prevention department. And so I looked into it and I was like, that sounds kind of interesting. And I went ahead and applied. And here I am. So I think the thing that intrigued me the most about the position is kind of going out ahead of some of those problems I was seeing. So instead of just sitting here and feeling insane, doing the same thing over and over again and not feeling like it was doing anything, I felt like jumping into prevention was a way for me to kind of go ahead of those problems and maybe try to help with some of those things before they happen, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. A lot of people will say when I ask that question that they just kind of stumbled into it by accident. Maybe you did, but it sounds like it was a little more intentional, that you were looking for some answers, or maybe to at least be able to provide some answers or solutions to some systemic problems. And I wonder if we could talk a little bit about that on both sides of the equation. You're still fairly new to the prevention world, but you saw it from the counselor's seat, if you will, and now here you are from the prevention specialist perspective. What were some of those systemic problems or things that you were seeing that were, problems that presented themselves, chronically?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things was around substance use. I would have kids as young as kindergarten telling me stories about, a family member who would drink too much, or, kids would come to school and would smell like marijuana and just those kinds of things. And then being able to see kind of how that impacts the kids, right? So if I hear a story about a kid whose parents, is explosively angry when they drink, and then I'm seeing the kid have explosive anger in class and have, disproportionate reactions to things, I'm thinking, okay, that is a learned behavior. And they're learning that from kind of those substance use. And then, of course, mental health concerns with family members and with even with older siblings as well. So I think the substance use piece was showing up more and more in the past couple of years.
You're listening to Prevention Perk. The funder of this project, along with all the other products of the Mid-America PTTC, is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Although funded by SAMHSA, the content of this recording does not necessarily reflect the views of SAMHSA. To learn more, visit samhsa.gov. Now, I won't pretend to know anything about being a counselor in that situation. What is it like? I mean, you can describe some of these things, but what is it that you're able to actually do? Or is that kind of the frustration? It's like, some of this is presenting itself and that this young person is struggling with it. Is it really that it's really just that challenging to be able to do something about it in that position?
It is. I mean, it really is. I think that my biggest frustration is that I can teach them every day of the week, 5 days a week, when they're at school, like, this is how we can respond to anger. Here are some things we can try. Here are some coping skills. But if that is not modeled elsewhere or it's not expected elsewhere, then it almost kind of was like when they go home at night, it erases everything we just talked about for the day. And then they come back to school the next day and we start all over. And so that's kind of what it felt like most of the time. And I won't say all the time, because we did see improvement, and kids are amazing and they're resilient and they learn so well. But it's one of those things where it took so much consistency on our end to make the tiniest of moves. And it just felt like if there was support at home, or there was more consistency at home, or more expectations at home that kind of aligned with those, that we would have maybe seen more progress.
So you're new to this. What you are familiar with in the elementary school setting and what you're learning now that you're in the community prevention specialist role, do you already see ways that maybe those intersect with one another, and how you might be able to begin to identify ways to make a difference?
Yes, I do think I think a little bit prevention can be kind of the same way, right? Because we don't see results of the things that we're doing in prevention like immediately. Like, sometimes it can feel like, I mean, I've already learned in the past few months, like, we're doing these things, but maybe then some new data comes out and you're like, oh, that is just not where we wanted that to go. So I do think that there's a little bit of that in prevention as well. But I think having the kind of background knowledge that I have is helpful for when I'm, coming up with programming or ideas for coalitions in my area. I'm thinking, like, I know this is what a lot of parents are struggling with. So how can we go and meet them where they're at? And I think that's the biggest thing that I feel intersection at with those two positions, is that I am very comfortable going and meeting people where they're at. And I think that's what it takes to be able to make a difference in those substance use and mental health concerns, is going and meeting them where they're at and not expecting them to, come to you and change a bunch of things right away, or, do something that is totally out of their comfort zone, but going straight to them and saying, hi, I have this information, and here it is, and giving it to them. So,
well, there's a lot of evidence-based practices that would target an elementary school age child, which, for my money, you can't really start too early to talk about prevention. Now, the language that you might use is different, but to talk about healthy decisions and choices and those kinds of things. Did you see some of that in the school setting that you were in, and were you able to apply any of those prevention initiatives while you were there?
So I think that before I joined this kind of prevention world, I don't think I knew that some of these things existed. I'll be honest. I don't think that I I knew that there were evidence-based, I mean, I knew there were evidence-based things, right? But I don't think I knew that there were things specifically around substance use that I could take and just give to my elementary school students. And I think part of that is because, and I was thinking about this a lot in preparation for this podcast, I think that the huge difference is the gift of time. In this position as a prevention specialist, I am expected to spend time researching things and being up to date on the latest data, and I'm given time to do those things. As someone in an elementary setting, that time does not exist. You're expected to be an expert on it, but when you're going to find the time to become that expert is kind of up to you, and that's kind of most often going to be in your personal time when you're going to be doing that stuff. So I think that's one thing that was tricky, is that I felt like I was just kind of, doing whatever. I was doing things that were important for the kids, but were they the most targeted towards what these kids needed, or were they the most, up to date things, or were they the most appropriate things for the issues I was seeing? I couldn't say 100%, so I think that having that time to maybe think more deeply about and research about prevention specific things, I think could make a huge difference in that position as a counselor.
It's so much fun to be in an elementary school setting because they want to compete to answer the question. It's like they want to be a part of it. And it's like, that's so much fun. And it just seems like that the results would be, they would be absorbing it. But again, I think you've already said that. Then you go home and you spend all this time with this primary person in your life, and it's a completely different world, and how do you do that on enough of a consistent basis where they start to understand that these are unhealthy things, and that, mom and dad shouldn't be doing it, but then I should also understand that it wouldn't be right for me to do it. It's complicated, and there's no doubt about it, but they are a lot of fun to be in front of, because then you get to middle school and into high school, and it's like, they look at you like you're an idiot. They don't want to talk to you at all. Elementary school, that'd be fun. That really would be.
Make you feel really cool. They make you feel like you're so important and you know so much information. As they start to get to the 5th grade, that might change a little bit. But, and the other thing too, that while you were just saying that, I was thinking about from the education perspective, from a counseling perspective, I don't have as many opportunities or as much time to educate parents. And I think that parents are oftentimes more receptive and open to information and education than we think they are. But there's no space for me as an educator to be doing those things. So I think that was another piece of like why the prevention world is so appealing to me, is because that was kind of missing from my other position.
Yeah, and if a parent has some idea about, that conversation, and maybe has some parameters in which they can discuss it, they don't really know how to get it started. It's an interesting thing that occurs. It's like, I just don't know how to say it or what to say. It's playing both sides of it. It's like trying to keep the door open and at the same time open the door, that kind of thing. I'm curious. So you've been doing this now just a few months. So what do you know so far? I mean, have you been through like the SAPS training, ethics? What are some of the things that you've been exposed to that you feel like are the building blocks for your new career?
Yeah, so I have not done the SAPS training yet. I will do that in December. But I did get to go to CADCA like a month after I started. And that was kind of an insane experience. My brain was very full of information. I felt like I was going to explode by the end of the week. And it's a long conference. And so I felt like that was a really good experience for me to be able to have right away in my first month or so, because I did get to kind of sit in on some sessions that were like, really basic, like the strategic prevention framework and just kind of that ground level stuff. But then I also got to sit in on some sessions where, coalition leaders were talking about some like really high level policy change stuff that they were working on. And so I got to kind of see the entire spectrum at CACA, and that was kind of amazing. Like I said, it was a lot. My brain was going to explode, but I think it was really helpful for me to kind of see like there's a whole sea of people out there who are all doing this work too. Um, like it's not just me in my little Kansas City bubble, just you know, out here randomly doing stuff. Like we're doing stuff based on, what CAG is doing, and we're doing stuff based on what we've seen be successful and what's research based. And so I think that was really an awesome experience that I'm very thankful that I got so early on.
One of the other things that seems to be universal these days, and I think it's probably been in the last 3 to 5 years, that there's really been a conversation about workforce development. And one of the things that comes up a lot is how do you recruit? How do you retain? How do you grow your workforce? And I think you're a good example. That was what I thought immediately when we broached this subject was you're a prime example of somebody who's had a career. You're established in doing something, and you've been identified prevention as something that's of interest. And now here you are now. Now, our goal from those of us that have been in the field for a while is to say, what do we need to do to keep you here? How do we keep you interested in this? And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but the question is, how do we make prevention the right fit for Sierra Thomas? And that applies to a lot of other people that might be listening to this and they're new to prevention. What is it that you would say this would really be the fit for me?
I think that something that I would say, I think this is a tricky question, Steve. I think that something I would say has been really helpful so far is just having that kind of network of people that you're meeting. So, like, I met you just at this random, event that I didn't really know much about, and I met a lot of people there, and I met a ton of people at CADCA, and I think kind of building those connections is really helping me because when I first started, and they were kind of explaining everything that I was going to do, and they were kind of walking me through things, I was like, I'm going to do all this by myself. Like, I'm going to change the world all by myself. Like, that is really scary. And so I'm kind of realizing it's not like that. And those connections are really important for me. Just kind of in general as a person, I really value that connection or having people to, bounce ideas off of, or, someone to say, yeah, I understand. It feels crazy. It feels defeating, some of these things that we're doing, but here's why it's important, or here's how I've gotten past that feeling. So I think that any opportunities that exist for people to build those networks and build those support systems within prevention, because it's really hard, first of all, to even explain this job to like my friends and family. They don't get it. They're like, okay, I don't really know what you like. It's awesome that you're helping kids remain drug and alcohol free, but I don't really get what you do. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know how to explain it any better either. So it's hard to kind of get support on a deep level from them because they just don't really know very much about it. So I think that prevention network of people who can kind of provide that support is going to be really important for me, for sure.
It's interesting you use the term network because I just came back from the NPN conference and I sat in on a couple of sessions there, and both of them specifically were about developing networks. And one of them was a rural network, which I'm fascinated by because that's an interest for me personally and professionally, developing the networks, but also the rural populations. And they really talked about that. And one of the individuals, actually, it's in the podcast that I did on the rural network, she said something to the effect of, when she sits down with her family, they don't have any idea what she's talking about. Or when she out with her friends, or when she's, in some social circle, that prevention is such a misunderstood, not in a negative way. It's just really hard to describe what is prevention, and what are you doing under the guise of prevention. And so I think networking, and not just networking and meeting people, but also connecting those networks or those individuals together into a network can really make prevention dynamic. Because the other one I sat in on did exactly the same thing, only under the sector of the faith-based system. So they brought together a number of churches from across the southern part of their state, and we're able to develop a network. And I think that there's real power in that. And I think that we learn from one another. I mean, I'm learning from
Yeah.
you, you're learning from me. And if we stay in connection, it gets me out of what is my familiar, because I know the coalitions that I work with, and I know the people that are leading those coalitions, and I know something about the communities in which they're based, but it doesn't really bring any outside influence into it unless we create some kind of a network, and then we can start to learn from that. And I think that there's a real key to that. And for me, that's what I like about doing the podcast is it's networking. It's a chance to meet people that I wouldn't otherwise get to have a conversation with. And we're recording this on Zoom. And the cool thing is I can talk to people all over the globe if I need to.
Right.
We're able to do that now as a result of this technology, and that's just another way of networking. So that brings in the next thing. I don't know if it's a question, but encouraging you to follow the idea of maybe starting your own podcast, because it's a great way to learn about um, new things that are happening, not only in prevention, but in the world around us.
Yeah, when you first asked me why being on a podcast episode was part of my 28 things list, I said I think it's just a really cool way to learn things. Like I think we learn better in conversation than we do just like reading about it, or just even listening to someone present about it. I think things stick a little bit better in conversation, and so I think that's part of why podcasts interest me. And yeah, I don't know, we'll have to see if you can be my first podcast guest on my podcast.
You know what I think though? So with the podcast, because I listen to some, and then when you're just describing your experience, is if you're sitting in a coffee shop and two people are having a conversation, don't you want to eavesdrop on what they're talking about and see if
Yeah.
there's a way that you can find a way to interject yourself into that conversation? That's why podcasts to me are so fascinating, because here's these two people that are having a conversation, or three, or however many people happen to be on that platform at the time. And it's like they're having a conversation, and all of a sudden I'm like, hey, well, hey, I want to be a part of that, right? I think that's
Yes.
what part of it is we're social creatures and we want to connect with one another. And this is just a unique way of being able to do that. I can do it virtually like we're doing, but I also have it set up where I can do it in person. So that really helps, close the gap. So it depends on whether they're in my neighborhood or somewhere across the nation. I can have a conversation with somebody, and we're talking about something fun, like how do you get started in prevention, and what makes it the right fit for you. So I'll ask you a question that I think a lot of people don't really know on the outset. It takes some pondering, I guess. Is Simon Sinek has some work on knowing your why, and I think that's really applicable to prevention work. Why would you want to do this? It's like that path to prevention, and you've kind of illustrated that a little bit. But I think a little bit more succinctly is, why do you think that this is a role that would be good for you? What is it about Sierra that you're like, this is my why, and it fits really well with prevention? I don't know if you can see that in yourself, but um, I think that that's really a driving force. And I think that that's what helps to retain the workforce in prevention, is being able to identify what that why is, because that why is intensely personal to us. It doesn't
Mhm.
even necessarily have to be shared with anyone, but it's a demonstration of who we are. Is it that we're a caring person and we want to provide for these young minds that are, learning in an environment where it might be difficult because of circumstances that are happening at home. And if you can connect with that and make that why kind of show through your prevention work, I think we have a higher likelihood of sticking around. And that covers the gamut. People might be interested in developing networks, developing podcasts, working with young kids, doing research. But when we find that, I think it helps us stay connected, because we don't have to continually ask ourselves, why am I doing this? You know?
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, like we've already talked a little bit about my why, just from the counseling perspective, wanting to, wanting to make a difference up the stream a little bit, as they say. But I also think too, everyone has kind of a more personal why that I believe that everyone has been impacted in some way by substance use or mental health concerns. And so I think that too is always part of it. And so I actually, at one of the sessions I was at CAGA, they had like, I think 15 or so people share their why. And it was so cool just to see like kind of how different they are, but they're all kind of boil down to the same thing. So you just said something that made me think of, how we can retain people in the prevention world. And I think playing to their why and playing to their strengths is one way to retain people. So like my supervisor is constantly asking me, what are you liking so far? Like, what are the things that you've been enjoying about your job so far? And how can we get more of those things on your plate? And I think that too ties directly back to your why, because if I'm enjoying it, it's probably fulfilling that why. And so I'm going to want to find opportunities to do more of those things. And in turn, I'm going to ideally be around for a while to keep on doing those things. So I think I think you're absolutely right. I think that why can really fulfill people, and as much as we can get people kind of leaning into that and doing those things, and that's what I think is really cool about prevention is that um, there are things we have to do. There are some things we have to do, but there's lots of flexibility and there's lots of openings to go and find the things that you like about prevention or about you know about the job or about being in the community and making more of those opportunities while still, doing what the community needs.
Well, at its foundation, that's what the strategic prevention framework really is all about, is building community. Whether it doesn't specifically say that, but that's what you're doing. And then the community in turn, as it builds itself, learns how to make that itself healthier. And I find that's the common denominator in most of the work that we do. I mean, I've worked with the National Alliance for Drug Endangered Children for the last couple of years and done work with them for the past decade or so. And it's all about building that network in the community that then reaches, children that are in drug endangered environments. That's about building community. Developmental assets is about developing community. All of that is learning how to communicate around a specific problem or issue, and how can we band together and make a difference. And so to me, prevention is almost like a service job. We're getting paid, but it's like doing service work. It's
Yeah.
it's something that's a labor of love that by chance and fortune we're able to collect a salary for, because and that makes it a challenge when you work with people that are volunteers in the community, because we're paid staff. So there's that whole thing, but still having that conversation. Somebody like you illustrated, it would have been nice to have had the capacity and the space to learn more about prevention, but you don't have that if you've got to be teaching a curriculum and making sure that they don't kill one another throughout the
Right.
course of the day. There's other things. So that's where the prevention profession comes in, is how do we keep this pipeline open so that the community itself can really make a difference for families and children that are at risk, or not at risk. We don't have to just have that as a target audience, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. We're building community here one day at a time, one piece at a time. And
you're listening to Prevention Perk. The 2023-2026 SAMHSA Strategic Plan presents a new person-centered mission and vision, highlighting key guiding principles and presenting new priorities, goals, and objectives. To achieve its mission, SAMHSA has identified 5 priorities, including strengthening the workforce to better meet the behavioral health needs of individuals, communities, and service providers. To view the strategic plan, visit samhsa.gov/about-us/strategic plan. There's also a link in the show notes.
Glad you decided to join the prevention ranks. I hope it's the right fit for you. I always have one final question that I like to ask people, and that is there something we didn't talk about, or is there something that you think is really important that maybe could be added to this conversation? In a sense, this is your chance to be the sage on the stage.
Oh my. um, Gosh, I don't think so. I think that we covered a little bit of everything. I think earlier you were talking about rural networks, and that like sparked something in me, and that's something I want to like learn more about. I think just from being being from small town South Dakota, and I see so many things around substance use and mental health there as well. So that's something I want to learn more about. And we have one of the counties we serve in Missouri is more rural too. So that's something I might lean into a little bit more based on our conversation. Something sparked a little interest in me on that one.
Well, I wanted to open the door also because if you're not going to mention it, we have to know, because anytime it's identified by the guest, we have to know about Harper. So
Oh gosh, how could I forget? Oh my gosh. Harper is she's an Australian cattle dog, or blue heeler. Sometimes people know them better as that. She is my little COVID baby. So I got her as a puppy during COVID. And yeah, she's the absolute best. She's obsessed with me because she's a COVID baby. So she grew up just being with me all the time. So she's kind of a mama's girl, but she's the best. And Australian cattle dogs are notoriously very high energy. They're kind of insane usually, but she's pretty low key. So I kind of lucked out there. I was fully prepared to be like running 4 miles a day, like doing the absolute most to get all of her energy out. But she likes to take naps and hang out on the couch. So that's what we do.
I think a lot of people end up inheriting a dog or an animal during the COVID
Yeah.
lockdown, and that's a good thing. If they're still paying attention to the little creature, but it sounds like
Right.
you and Harper have quite the bond. That's a door opener right there for working with kids, because who doesn't like to see a puppy come? So.
Oh, I know. They love the kids at my elementary school used to love seeing pictures and updates on her. So definitely a door opener.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for having this conversation, and you can check this off your. It's not a bucket list. You're 28 and 28, but I'm glad you took the opportunity to chat with me about your venture into the prevention realm.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for listening to Prevention Perk, a podcast from Mid-America PTTC. To learn more about our innovations, visit pttcnetwork.org and look under your PTTC for the Mid-America link. Remember, prevention is better together, and together we are stronger.